Now. There you go. You're good.
Okay. Hey, y'all. Welcome to Bits and Books. I'm Marnie Stockman, and today we dare to lead by Brene Brown. So, want to introduce everyone. Actually, I'll let them introduce themselves. So, Brene Brown's book, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, Whole Hearts. And one of the big questions that she asks in her trainings around daring to lead is to answer the question for yourself. Vulnerability is fill in the blank. So as I see folks in my Zoom room, I'm going to call you in that order. So Kyle Spooner, you're going to be up first. Introduce yourself and tell me vulnerability is.
So my name is Kyle Spooner. I'm a director of operations for an MSP out of Baltimore. I'm also one of the admins of MSP Geek conference plug. We have one coming up in May. Go buy tickets. So now, do you want me to answer this based on the book or based on my personal opinions?
Oh, your personal. What do you believe vulnerability is?
I believe vulnerability is really important, but it also has its place.
All right.
That is my personal opinion.
Thanks. Tim?
Oh,
Vulnerability
hey. Do I get to introduce myself too, or
yes,
just
Kyle? Yeah.
You got to introduce yourself as Kyle.
All right. Hi, I'm formerly known as Kyle. My name is Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard and Team Tim. When I think of vulnerability as it relates to the book, I think about having that trusted person or trusted group of people in my life that can speak into my life, or I can hear from about stuff, right? Hey, Tim, you're really messing up here. Hey, Tim, you're doing a really good job there. So that trusted group of individuals that can provide me like that open, honest, and timely feedback, and allowing myself to be vulnerable to hear that from them.
To hear it. Nice. Jim Smith, the one that we know.
I'm Jim Smith. I'm still a Sagittarius. I'm the owner of Proper Sky. We're a managed IT services company outside of Philadelphia. And to me, I think vulnerability is the key to authentic leadership. I think this book did a really good job of sort of reinforcing that concept. I think Brene did an excellent job. But I have found that a lot of what we'll talk about today really resonated. This is an excellent book, and I really think it is the key to unlocking crucial conversations inside your organization. Right, and I think this does a great job of talking about that.
Ray, I feel like you need no introduction, but
I'm always happy to introduce myself. Ray Rossini, founder of MSP Media Network and OIT VoIP. So yeah, this network that we're on, putting together smart people. Can you reiterate the question for anybody that just might have joined?
Vulnerability is, how would you fill in the blank? Vulnerability is.
Vulnerability is where you feel unsure that you can protect yourself wholly, right? Whether it's in communication where you feel you're at a disadvantage, speaking to somebody more knowledgeable in a subject, and you feel that you may lose something possibly by misspeaking, or vulnerability could be as simple as putting yourself in harm's way, or noticing that you're in harm's way or have the potential to be. It could also be a promising thing, being vulnerable to someone that you love and will love you back and support you. And that could be a vendor relationship, that can be a human relationship, it could be whatever. But vulnerability has promise, in my opinion.
Ooh, I like that. Vulnerability has promise. Chris Dix, will you introduce
Hi.
yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Dix. I'm the founder and lead developer at ChatStyle, which is a communications and automation tool for MSPs. And yeah, for me, vulnerability is scary, I guess, is the best word that pops into my mind when I try to finish that sentence. It's we kind of learn to build up these protective measures around ourselves and different situations, and where we are allowed to be vulnerable as adults, as friends, as family members. It's all a little scary but necessary, and I really did enjoy the book and the way it dealt with some of the lessons around when and vulnerability can really be an important part of leadership.
Yeah. Maureen?
I'm Maureen Golden. I am also a co-founder of Compliance Scorecard. And when I think of vulnerability, I think of authenticity. I think somebody had said, I think that you need discernment when being vulnerable. And I also think it's the key to any fulfilling relationship, whether it's professional, personal, whatever. And I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, so glad we're covering this book.
Excellent. I am. So as I said, Marnie Stockman wrote Lead It Like Lasso. When I first read the book and she said vulnerability is the first thing that came to mind is vulnerability is the potential to not get to play. So it kind of goes along with what Ray said. I was a major tomboy growing up, and I would play boys sports instead of girls sports. And if I cried, I would not get to play. So by golly, I can take a good beating and not because I was constantly shocked of how is it Doug is laying there crying his eyes out and he still gets to play with us all the time and I'm not allowed to at all. So I know that doesn't relate for many of you, but as a female in the IT space where I was often, thanks Maureen, I'm not the only female in the room this time, being too vulnerable meant I wasn't going to get to play. So I built a lot of armor like nobody's business and have been called out on that multiple times. I think as I got older, I got better at that. But I originally thought vulnerability meant I might not get to do this anymore if I'm too vulnerable. So Heather is joining us all the way from way on the other side of the pond. Super excited. So Heather, I'm going to give you a little warm up of what we're doing here. And that was perfect timing because everybody else introduced themselves and then filled in the blank with the statement, vulnerability is, what would you think? So I believe you're already prepared for this situation, so I don't feel like I'm blindsiding you, but I also know you're willing to be vulnerable, so I can totally, hopefully with that, say, go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I am actually prepared for that one. I'm Heather Johnson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Gozinta. Brene Brown is one of my favorite authors. She's always on my desk in various book forms. Vulnerability is essential in leadership. You know, when we start anything, we want to be perfect. I am always at fault for that. I want to be perfect and I don't want anyone to see any fault, but you can't lead like that. You have to show that you are a human being, that you make mistakes, that you don't have a perfect past. I mean, I struggled for a long time thinking I could be a business owner because I wasn't proud of so many things that I had in my past. Nothing major, but they just felt like they were defining me and holding me back. But showing those and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I powered through this and I'm a strong business owner. That's where you can get people to be behind you, because everybody has a past, everybody has vulnerability. It's what we do with that and what we learn from that that makes us strong, amazing people that we want to be around.
Excellent. Solid entrance into the call. So I have some questions I want to ask folks because boy, I always, as I'm reading the book, I've talked about this before, I walk in the neighborhood and I read, and then I take notes on an index card or in the book. And these are just like page numbers and 1 or 2 words. And if we talked about all of the pages I wanted to discuss in this book, Ray, it's not going to be the hour-long podcast you were hoping for. But I hope everybody's got
we can go
cleared for tomorrow.
We can go for a couple of days. I'm good with it.
Perfect. I'll let my sister know I won't be making her birthday. I won't do that. Her name is Karen. I will make sure we finish in time. So first question, and Tim, I'm going to call on you because you sort of implied the answer to this one. So Brene Brown calls it a square squad. If you're a Ted Lasso fan, he called them the Diamond Dogs, which I thought was very funny. I think he got it from the same square squad, Diamond Dogs, right? So this is a group of people that you trust to give you honest feedback. So Tim, do you want to poke a little more at what you were saying about vulnerability.
Yeah, and so, and truth be told, I'm kind of rebuilding that circle of trust, or my diamond dogs, as Ted
Well, I
would
think
say.
that's super important. Yeah.
Right. And, obviously, Maureen is part of that. Our family is part of that when and where appropriate. But obviously, being able to have outside influence that's not just family. Right. So I used to have a really big community. Then COVID hit and everything, whatever. And so I'm kind of rebuilding that a little bit, trying to put together the right people in my life to speak that truth into my life that I would be willing to hear from.
Oh yeah, there are plenty of people out in the world that are happy to give you advice, but whether or not you trust them to accept that advice, want it from them, is a different story.
And from a business perspective, like if I were to put my MSP hat on, or even client scorecard hat on, like having a group of trusted advisors is really important, right? So kind of two different hats here, at least for me, right? One from the business perspective and one from the personal perspective. And those lines are a little blurry, and I'm trying to separate them, hence why I'm trying to rebuild like the personal side, right? And so we have the business side, we have a trusted advisors that have the accountability hitting me with the bat. But I am rebuilding the personal side. COVID kind of blew that all to hell, and trying to reestablish relationships after that, it's been a real struggle, honestly.
So you mentioned the business and personal side. Jim, I'm going to come to you because I know as an Evolve member that I think, would you consider your Evolve group, or maybe a subset of your Evolve group, part of your Square Squad? Or do you have a different set, multiple Square Squads?
It's interesting you say that. I would probably say yes. I didn't even think of the Evolve guys. So I just had dinner with a couple of my old fraternity brothers last night. And we were just talking about how fortunate we are to be in our mid 40s and still have a circle of friends that keeps in relatively close touch. There's a book, I forget the name of it, it's about loneliness in men. And, I think one of the things that we really try to strive for is spending quality time with each other. And I think it's pretty awesome. In terms of like work, I think the leadership team that I have now is exceptional. So one of the cool things about Evolve, right, is that they ask you to sort of rank yourself, like, do you feel like you can give honest feedback? And far and away, that's the highest scoring score that I have pretty consistently across the board. I think I really empower everybody that just let me have it because I'm a give and take. And I think the relationships excel when you can be honest. And I think that's good. So I got a little bit in the personal life, and then, I also have a business advisory group, which has been pretty cool. So it's sort of, it's probably not as relationship driven, but they're also business owners, and their feedback is incredibly candid and definitely done. And then of course my Evolve group. Yeah, I absolutely, I can't believe I didn't even think of those guys, but those guys really have become my best friends over these last 6 or 7 years. And I greatly respect their feedback and the partnership and being able to open up to them in a way that, a lot of people don't.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the fraternity and reading the book about loneliness in men. And I think business owners, I always think of Evolve because when I was in the school system, I was the math supervisor. And so I was not in any chain of command with principals, but the assistant superintendent told me that sometimes you need to go be the support system for principals because it's very lonely. It's like being a CEO. You don't want to go fuss to your superintendent because they're your evaluator, and then everyone else works for you. And to your point, it sounds like within your company, right, you can get that honest feedback from others. And so it's less lonely versus like the principal was kind of on their own island. So she said, you need to go and help them on their island. So that's interesting that you mentioned the lonely piece. Heather, how about you? I know you do a ton of work in this area. I also know that it is a different time zone. And so we only have you for a bit.
Yeah. For me, I'm really lucky that my husband, Brian, and I run this company together just because we love talking business and we are pretty honest with each other. But I also realized, like still would probably like to be able to sleep in bed some nights. So, you know, you can't be completely honest all the time. So I realize he probably pads things sometimes. And so I do have people that I can talk to, people that I've worked with before that know my style, that I can say, and I always try to make sure I make it clear. There's times where I need to be pumped up. And then there's other times where I'm like, okay, no, this I need you to tell me. Am I like this? Am I coming off wrong? Am I presenting myself in the way that I think I'm presenting myself? Tell me the truth this time, because I can't have that all the time, but I need to have that with somebody when I say, okay, give me the truth, that they feel comfortable to. And then being able to absorb it in a way and take that breath and be like, thank you for that. Let me go cry in a corner. Because it's hard. It's hard to hear that kind of stuff, but you do
Yeah.
need it. And
Yeah.
you need it from people that you can trust are not going to just do it to hurt you or make you feel bad, but are really looking out for you.
So it's interesting you say it that way, because your daughter and my children are the same age. And I wonder if I think about this a lot, that at what point do your children become old enough, mature enough that you decide, oh, they can be part of my squad and give honest feedback? Because believe me, at 14, they're more than happy to give honest feedback. But you might not want their feedback, be ready to take it, or trust in it. And my daughter and I actually discussed that quite a bit, of like, at what age, you know, she's always been very perceptive about people. And so, you know, at some point I had to say, like, oh, actually my 15-year-old does know best. And I'm going to have to take I'm going to have to take a chill pill to acknowledge that I'm not going to get in a battle with her, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know, my daughter's 22. Yeah, 22. I have to, what month is it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yes, her advice can be cutting, but it is very, very true.
Every
You know,
parent here laughs because we all know the pain.
and
I
it's
feel
nice
you.
because she works in our marketing department. So
Yeah.
sometimes I give her a video. I'm like, I am doing so good. Look at this video. And she's like, you're looking to the side the whole time. Could you?
Yeah.
No, I'm not putting that anywhere. Like, and it's like, oh gosh, I thought I had it that time. And please never say this again. It's not cool. I get that one a lot. She just needs to hold
Well, that
that
one
up.
I ignore.
Yeah.
But I have recorded multiple videos. Like I had to re-upload a video that I did for MSP Geek where I do an introduction. I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. You know, do a pitch because MSP Geek Con's happening, and then I cut screen, and then there's no audio. So when I reviewed to make sure it recorded and there was stuff happening in the beginning, it was just me talking. So it was great. There's audio, I heard it, but then as soon as I switched scenes, boom, no audio. And I was like,
On.
there goes like 30 minutes I have to redo.
Mm.
Yeah, but that is why you like take feedback, etc. Kyle, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
So on page, I think I wrote page numbers down for this one, because they talked about compliance, which I think is interesting for the MSP space, to talk about compliance and control when it comes to the humans, not to the technology. So she asked the question, who is a victim of leading for compliance and control? Again, not based on technology, compliance and control. Have you seen that in the space? I think it's part of MSP Geek. You see a lot of other businesses. What's your take on that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that I've seen anything specific. Vulnerability when it comes to compliance and control is like referring to the the requirements that you have to do as an MSP. Like you have to follow specific things, and then you
Yeah,
set
like
work.
around compliance and
Yes.
control.
But when you think, not even just like the control aspect, like as an MSP, you sell time, right? That is what you do. So you have to have a control to make sure that the time is recorded, when it's recorded, what type of time you're selling and doing all that. So teaching and being vulnerable with why you have to do the controls and why you have to follow those controls and the overall compliance of being an MSP doesn't happen, right? As a leader, in a company of an MSP, you're like, why didn't you track your time? Why do you only have 7 hours? Why do you have 2 hours? Why did you spend 7 hours on this password reset? Um, and there's no explanation as to why you do that. You're telling them they made a mistake, but they
Yeah.
don't understand why the mistake exists in the first place. And being vulnerable about how the business operates scares a lot of people, and I don't understand why. Because as someone who enjoys data analytics and having that full picture and understanding, you're missing a third of your information to make decisions based on, and it's difficult to process that when you're having to discipline someone, and if they don't follow the compliance guidelines or don't follow the control guidelines that you have. Understanding and being vulnerable with why those exist, and being, receiving that feedback to why that might be stupid as well is also important.
Maybe not using stupid in the conversation.
I tell people all the time, hey, this is why we do this specific workflow. If you think of a better one, if this is stupid for a specific reason, let me know. I'm happy to discuss why and how to make it better. And maybe there's limitations in the system. Maybe there's limitations in something specific. But yeah, this might be stupid, and I agree that it's stupid, but it has to happen for this specific reason. And being vulnerable with the understanding is super important, and not enough people do that.
So, and it's interesting you say that. It reminds me of a story that Brene said in the book, where her team would come to her with a complaint about why she was saying X, Y, or Z. And in her mind, she had the 10-year strategic plan, the 3-year strategic plan, the 1 year. So she knew all of these other things were going to line up, and she had never shared that. So it seemed like she was making these mandates for no reason. Since we mentioned Evolve, one of the companies that I worked with there, they had me come down and do a keynote for them in their sales kickoff. And part of what they did in their kickoff was go through what they call their Kool-Aid talk of why we do what we do. And they've told great stories from their customers' perspective and why it was important to their customers. And then they started talking about operational maturity level, OML scores, and every single person, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it was the lowest ranking person, if you were going to rank the folks in the room, asked how to move the needle on the OML level from a 3.8 to a 4.0. What would it take? And at no point had they shared that with the team before, because they didn't think that everyone in the organization was going to care about an operational maturity level score. But when they realized what the business was doing for their employees and the value they brought, the whole team was like, I want to know how to move the needle 2 decimal points, like 2/10 of a point. How can
I help?
How can I help with that? And I watched the CEO, the president, and the CRO were in the room, and you watched their brains just break a little of like, holy cow, I had no idea that they would care so much when we shared that. So sorry, I went on that diatribe, but I just saw it in action. Chris, thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's to think about the fact that just sharing that information, like that being clear, which one of the things I really liked about the book was that clear is kind and unclear is unkind. That really resonated with me. The just being clear and open with everybody and understanding how that could change the dynamic and that a little bit of vulnerability and insight into what's really happening could change everybody's understanding of what's happening. That's pretty amazing to me.
It is also amazing that a sentence like clear is kind, well, I guess it's 2 sentences, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. It's that weighs on your brain for a bit, and you think about what are we going to do with that information, right? Because I do need to do some things differently with that. Maureen, I wanted to ask you, she said, this was around page 144, if anybody's got the book and wants to kind of see what I'm talking about. How does trying to see things from your client's perspective help with customer success? So that's a very business related, but it's about perspectives and trying to see things from other people's perspectives. So thoughts on that?
I totally agree with that. I actually think that's kind of my niche in the business is kind of taking that perspective, which is funny because I'm very much like the business and numbers person, but I'm also a huge believer that that only happens from the customer experience up. So I don't know whether, I don't even remember the whole question you just asked, but when you asked
Just
it,
how
it's
does
like-
trying to see things from your customer's perspective help with customer success? So taking a look at it from their lens.
I think looking at it from their lens is a win-win. Like your customer is the center of your business. You're not, your product isn't. But I think your customers and your employees. So I think taking their perspective is the right perspective. That's who you've built a business for, from the business side. And like I said, it's very much how I am in my personal life and in the business too. It's like, yeah, the numbers and the spreadsheets and all of that matter, but the bottom line is that the way to be successful and the way to build real relationships is looking at everything from the customer's view. Like, okay, people understand mistakes happen. How would I want somebody to respond to it? How would I want somebody to support me? How would I want? So I totally agree with that piece of it.
I think we have to be careful too. Too much vulnerability can be a problem. Because if you're constantly going to the client being like, look, I'm sorry, this is the situation, this happened.
It's that vulnerability weakness kind of balance.
It becomes, but also, you know, vulnerability being too much affects everything else too. Like if you're too vulnerable with your squared group, your square squad, that also, like, it becomes less of being vulnerable and more of being a burden. And you know, it doesn't necessarily translate to vulnerability, it becomes misunderstood. And it starts to develop a cycle of complaining, of sharing nothing but faults. And it has to be very careful with how much you share. And
I
to
think
whom.
discernment really comes in with that.
Yeah.
You know, discerning what you're sharing.
I learned that lesson early on in life. You know, when Maureen and I first started, whatever, all that stuff, and way back, I had a Bible study I used to attend, and you know, it was a bunch of guys. You know, we kind of came together and, you know, talked about, you know, life challenges. And at that time, I was dealing with a lot of life challenges. And, you know, after a couple of weeks, not only did I start to feel like I was the one complaining all the time, but then I started hearing from the other guys in the men's group, like, this is not the Tim show. And so I had to like quickly learn, like, even though I had my diamond dogs, right, my Foursquare, like I was saying, I had my group and my peeps. I had to make sure, like, not only was everybody getting equal volley time, and it wasn't all about me, right? So I had to kind of like regroup and rethink about what is appropriate to share across the audience, across who I'm talking with and who I'm connecting with, and how vulnerable am I, and to be able to share that kind of stuff. And lastly, like, leave space for others, right? Especially if you're meeting with a group of people, whether it's evolved peer groups, like Jim was saying, like, make sure you leave room for others, right? It can't just be the Team Tim show. And I'm learning
the
that.
irony of the shirt on that.
Well, and I'm still learning that, right? You know, we're doing this thing, and then, you know, we've been talking about it. I'm like, I talk too much. I need to shut up and leave room for other people. You know, and
Which is not
it's
easy.
an ongoing lesson daily for me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
I think Brene Brown does a great job. I think she's got inside the book. She talks about that executive that's telling the private equity guys about how he's afraid and he's not sure he can execute. And she's like, that's the last thing you want to tell your investor group, right? So there's a way that you can structure this discussion.
That discernment.
Exactly, the discernment's an excellent way to describe it. And I think Brene does an excellent job of like diving into that sort of how much is too much in a very practical method. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have another question that brings me back to my education days. I remember one day the assistant superintendent stood up and said, because people were starting to complain about, well, the kids can't do this, parents do this, yada, yada. And she said, all of the parents are sending their best kids to school. Like they're not leaving the good ones at home, right? You're getting the best that they've got. And on page 215, she asks the question, how does knowing that people are doing their best change your thinking? Heather, thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. You always have to be empathetic of the people that are around you. And it's hard because sometimes, as business owners, one of the things that Brene Brown says all the time is paint done for me. And you kind of talked about it before, being very clear, but, painting that whole picture, because if people don't know that, they're trying to help you, they're trying to do their best. And if they can't understand what you're wanting, they're not able to make it as far. But I actually had an instance this week. I'm good at business. I feel like I'm pretty capable in what I do every day. And I feel like, yes, I'm doing a good job. But then I learned to ski this week. And I did my best on a roller hill. And there were two people with me. And this is like an indoor ski hill and it rolls. And so we're all on our skis. And I tried to ski already 4 times. So I thought I was a pro. And I did my best. And I never was able to do a pizza cutter to go to stop myself. And I went 4 days this week and I've spent 4 hours. And those other people were like going back and forth. They graduated and they had 2 ski poles and they were like skiing on the indoor hill. And I was still going back and forth, one arm, then the other arm. And I grabbed the bar again because I was terrified. And I did my best. And everybody was very, very empathetic of me. And they said I did okay. And I shouldn't go skiing on March 1st to Austria, but I'm going to anyway because they have a fondue
Too much
bar.
French fry, not enough pizza.
Yeah, not enough pizza.
Been there.
Absolutely, yes. So, but that it makes me think of that. People are doing their best, and you can't look at them and be like, oh, they're not trying hard enough. That could be them trying hard enough. So giving them the tools, making sure that it has nothing to do with what you're doing and that you're being clear. I did take my ski class in Dutch, and I don't know if my Dutch may be good enough for when I'm on skis on a roller hill. It's very good when I'm sitting here, but not good when I'm actually skiing. So making sure that your employees and whoever you're speaking to is really getting the message and that you're being clear in your communication. And that when they say, yes, I understand, that they really are understanding so that they can be successful.
I think it puts your brain back into I need to teach mode instead of criticize mode, right? If they are truly giving their best, then there's a misunderstanding somewhere along the way. It might be their Dutch to English translation. It might be, they didn't get another piece of the pie, be it pizza or otherwise, but what is that they are missing? So I have one more question, but I'd like to spend some time on it. So on page 242, she asks, do you teach falling? So she gives a story about learning to skydive, and that the very first lesson in skydiving, you spend time jumping off of chairs and things to learn how to fall, not how to jump out of a plane. And so I'm curious. So that is all about kind of like sticking the landing, the ending, right? And how to protect yourself when you fall. So as we think about for our employees, for our team, et cetera, do we specifically teach what failing or falling looks like and how to recover from that? Does that bring anything to mind for anyone?
So this is ancillarily related, but she talks about perfectionism, and she talks about it's a one offhanded comment. I listened to the audiobook. I forget what page it's on or whatever. But she's like, does anybody like ever look at the child's quiz and then immediately judge them for getting the 2 or 3 answers wrong, right? Like, and jumping onto that piece. And the first thing that resonated with me was like, I absolutely do that. Every time the test comes home, that's the first thing I do, right? And so it really did a great job of tying all these pieces together for me anyway. I felt like teaching my kids that it's okay to fail, provided that they gave it their best effort, is a far more valuable lesson than getting all the answers correct on the quiz, right? And I think that's when she uses the parachute parallel or parable or whatever it is. I think that's ultimately the point she's trying to drive home, right? So how do you create an environment where taking risk is an acceptable part of your day-to-day life, right? And I think, when you combat perfectionism, which I think a lot of CEOs have a tendency to do, right? It's a tough thing to teach the people below you that it's okay to take that step and fail and sort of recover from it. And that was my interpretation. I think she did an excellent job of making that point.
I think is it Sarah Blakely from Spanx, whose dad every day would say, what did you like, what was a failure you overcame today? Like that was their dinner conversation. Is it wasn't like, did you get a new Girl Scout badge today? It was, what did you fail at? So that it was a regular part of their conversation, that you just are resilient and kind of learn how to overcome your failures, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah.
I used to, I was a musician. That was one of my majors in college, was I was a harpist. But in an orchestra, when you're scared about what you're doing, you tend to play softer because you don't want anyone to notice that you're making a mistake. But then the next time, you don't know if you're making a mistake or not, so you're still playing soft. The important thing, and what I've always told my kids in groups, is play loud right away. Play confidently, be confidently wrong, so that the conductor can say that's wrong. And yes, it's embarrassing, but then you're not wrong anymore. You're not learning it the wrong way. You're learning it the right way, right from the start. Yes, you have to go through that's wrong. But with my employees, when they show me that they're wrong, they don't need to be scared about it. It's a teaching moment. It's just a moment to learn, and I'd rather that sooner than later. So I'd much rather it be nice and loud. Let's have a big loud mistake.
That is
so
a
we
great
can fix
analogy. Yeah, I love that. Make your mistakes loud so we can address them.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah, I really
fantastic.
I liked so much about the book about tying in this all with vulnerability, but to your point about jumping off of chairs and things like that, just a lot of it is about creating a safe space for vulnerability to know that when you make these mistakes, which you will, which everyone does, then that it is a learning opportunity, like Heather said, and that it's so much of this is about learning and listening and that safe space to learn from your mistakes, which you always learn more from your mistakes than your successes. So
That's one of the things I don't necessarily personally translate vulnerability to having a culture around failure acceptance. That's as a leader, as someone who has people that look up to them, not necessarily direct reports. Creating fostering a culture of mistakes are okay. I think is more important specifically than being vulnerable, because you're going to find out the mistake. Right, in a business, you're that will eventually come up. Either this one specific that you make may be small enough where it'll go under the radar for a specific amount of time, but if they pile up enough, all of them will come to the surface, right? And understanding that it's okay to make mistakes, and you foster, because I agree, with Chris. Mistakes are an important learning tool in growing as an individual, growing as a leader, and growing as a person. I'm going to fail, and building that confidence in others that it's okay to fail, I think is not specifically tied to vulnerability. There's obviously aspects of it, by allowing yourself to admit mistakes when there isn't a culture of mistakes are okay, is definitely putting yourself in a vulnerable position. But as leaders and as managers, I think it's so important to foster, because you're the mistakes that happen are going to come up. They're going to cost you, and you're going to have to go back and fix them, right? If someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I did this, help me," I'm going to be able to resolve that problem. I'm going to be able to put fixes in that that will mitigate the damage from a mistake. Then if it comes up 6 months later and now I have to do all of this triage and troubleshooting and problem solving and apologizing and credit giving and whatever else you may have to do as an individual. I also don't necessarily think, because I talked about fostering vulnerability as in the form of innovation. I think those can also be separated, because it ties back into making mistakes and failing to innovate. But part of innovation is the understanding that failure is going to happen. It's not necessarily creating a vulnerable space. Like if I'm trying to innovate on something, I'm going like, how many times did it take people to start? Heather mentioned starting a business. How many businesses have you started that didn't work out? I mean, Tim has an MSP and an actual business, right? Innovation and changing how you do things is inherently going to be more failures than successes. And I think fostering that culture individually from vulnerability is important as well.
Yeah. I don't know where I heard this. Is a great line. This will be fast, but there was a guy in the 80s or 90s that traded a bunch of stock. He lost a ton of money for his organization. It's a real famous case study.
Oh, did you talking about me recently?
Yeah, I think it was you.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
fair.
you shorted Nvidia.
I didn't. I feel bad for those that did.
Oh, I did too. So anyway, they gave this kid that just came out of Harvard or Princeton or whatever a bunch of access to the trading floor that he really shouldn't have had. He made this decision because they want to have democratized controls, and he lost something like $100 million. And they were interviewing the CEO. The CEO is like, "Well, are you going to fire him?" He's like, "No, I just spent $100 million educating him on what he will never ever do again. Why would I fire this kid? I just wasted all this money teaching him something that he'll never be able to learn again."
Yeah.
I think the thing that really resonates with me is I try to instill this in the culture here. We learn from our failures, not our successes, right? And so it's the failures that are an opportunity to see where you're leaking and where you can have self-improvement. It's not getting it right the first time, right? So don't beat yourself up. Just get back on the horse, right?
The only thing that I'll say to add to that is, when you do fail, be careful of overcorrection.
Mhm.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Because when a mistake happens, when a problem happens, overcorrecting to make sure that problem doesn't happen again happens so much. And it is so common in process, procedure, business in general, that it is, you got to be very careful that you're mitigating the individual mistake, not trying to, that you're not overcorrecting and causing additional problems in the future.
So that is like somebody in class calls someone else a chicken, and the teacher makes a policy that you're no longer allowed to say chicken at all, ever, or you're going to get a referral. And then the next unit is the poultry unit. Like it happens all of the time. Like, and it is also, I thought a lot about this in the course of reading the book. When people don't have the language to have an honest conversation around a mistake, they end up making really dumb policies like the no saying chicken policy, right? Like they send out a company-wide blast to 1,500 employees around, you are no longer allowed to take a 32-minute lunch. Like, who took the 32-minute lunch that broke something huge that is creating really poor policies because someone doesn't have the ability to have the courageous conversation? And Heather, I know you do a lot of work around courageous conversations. If you could just have the honest conversation around the mistake that was made and the consequences because of that mistake, we could really save the embarrassment for the other 1,499 people that had nothing to do with.
One of the things that I would also suggest too is making sure that you're having that courageous conversation in a timely manner. At least, like, as a
course.
business owner, like, I'm
Yeah.
not waiting till their annual review to tell them where they messed up 7 months ago. Like,
You shouldn't.
you
You
know-
should absolutely not be doing that if anyone
Yes.
is doing that.
no, like,
There should be
like,
no surprises.
right then and there, we're, as a new business, and we're bringing in staff, and we're working through, and we're building, norming, forming, storming, all that great EOS stuff, right? Really starting to understand, like, oh, I messed up, and getting that from my co-founder, or some other means, but nip it in the bud in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Open, honest, transparent. I think I actually wrote in one of the employee contracts that said a bullet that was like, open, honest, and brutal conversations as part of their employment agreement, right? To a certain extent, yes.
One of the things that I don't think we've mentioned about being vulnerable is, if you are vulnerable and you cannot, by admitting vulnerability and by being comfortable with being vulnerable, there are still consequences to actions.
Yeah.
And consequences to mistakes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can't go in and expect, if I'm vulnerable, that there won't be any consequences.
Oh, I'm allowed to just make all the mistakes in the world
Right.
because I'm allowed to tell Kyle I made them. Great.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. Understanding that as well is super important. Even from the other side, when you're accepting the vulnerability, you still have to be able to remove your
It
emotion
doesn't
from
eliminate
that.
accountability.
Correct.
Right. It just adds a level of humanness to the conversation.
Maybe be a little more timid
Humanity.
with your, punishment or your consequences. That it's not, I won't say punishments, consequences. It's not as brutal, to use Tim's word.
Yeah, I was like, I think punishment and brutal are maybe two of the things we're supposed to avoid in our
Strong
vulnerability.
adjectives.
This is where I'm learning to choose my words appropriately.
Yeah.
I have
think
the same
im-
problem.
Important in that, having those conversations, but being very clear on what you want to see as the next steps. It's the empathy, the understanding.
Yeah.
Yes, a mistake was made. I've made mistakes too. Let's see, how do I help you not make this mistake again? What training do you need? How can I better explain this to you? And let's, have a follow-up on this in 2 weeks so we can see instances that you've had this happen again, or whatever time period you need. Instances where you've had this again, where the things that we've tried have worked. And if they haven't, let's think of something else. So not having it just be, oh, that's it. But instead, here's our plan that we're going to have together to get this resolved. That way it just doesn't go away. And then you have the mistake come up again. And it's like, oh, I need to write this up. I need to do this again. It also gives you, if you have that all in writing and both understand, it does give you a paper trail. And if you aren't having paper trails, get paper trails. You want to make sure that you have that.
You can use
There's
it for
lots of
your
good tools.
reviews too. You don't have to write. You can write it down and bring it up in your reviews.
Yep.
I do a leadership class with my MSP, with those that are inside who are interested in learning more about leadership and being better leaders. And this past Wednesday, we had our group and we talked about being overwhelmed, and dealing with how that feeling and understanding it. And that's the first thing I said was the reason why I'm bringing up and talking about overwhelmed, because I am personally right now overwhelmed, and it's important to deal with this and recognize it, not only in the work you have to do, but how you interact with people as well. Because becoming an overwhelmed individual, your responses become much shorter and clipped, and it starts becoming like you're aggravated and irritable, and it's not necessarily the case. You're just the feeling of it, and it's very important to understand what to be vulnerable about as well.
Agreed. Because I don't want to get kicked out of our StreamYard or Zoom or wherever we are. For folks listening, it was Dare to Read by Brene Brown. Again, brave work, tough conversations, whole hearts. Like I said, we could easily continue this conversation until tomorrow, but we will not. So the next book on the list, I'm hoping to get the authors here. So Dave Kava and Sean Walsh from Encore Strategic just wrote the Pumpkin Plan for MSPs based off of Mike Michalowicz's book. So that is going to be on our list next. So I hope all can join. And thanks as always to MSP Media Network for having us. And thanks all for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for putting
Thanks,
this.
all.
Thanks.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP